Well, we're sitting at 78 participants, and perhaps some are joining on Facebook Live. I hope there will be some people that join us on that if they're unable to join Zoom for whatever reason. And please also note that a recording will be available in several days' time on YouTube. So welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have a lovely turnout this evening. Welcome members and non-members alike. I think we're probably all really looking forward to hearing Trevor talk, because he is an excellent speaker, as many of you already know, because it's not the first time that he is being our guest speaker at a Bird Club evening meeting. So welcome, Trevor, to you especially. And I'm going to hand you back to Mike, who is going to introduce Trevor to everyone listening.
Thanks very much, Priscilla. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be back. I think we've all taken a bit of a break from Zoom for a while. Now that we're back in sort of hard lockdown status again with COVID, we're all taking care, so that means we have to extend these Zoom sessions for a bit longer. But yeah, we did have a meeting earlier in the year, but it was really early in the year, and I think everyone was dusting off their festive season cobwebs. So if you ever want to get a nice turnout for a monthly meeting, we ask Trevor to join us for a talk, because his talks are always absolutely fascinating and very enthralling. So maybe just to introduce our speaker tonight, I think most people will know Trevor pretty well. So that's Trevor over there. And we all know of him as a very top of the range sub-region lister. He's currently our top lister, I think, on the official stats. And I've put 936 species and counting. And I'm going to be bold and say that we're at 937 now. Trevor, you can maybe expand on that a little bit, but we have the Crested honey buzzard that's making some very reliable appearances in Somerset West. For those of you that haven't been to see it, I suggest you do, because we now know that it's not a hybrid and it's a full species. So Trevor, I think 936 was your white-cheeked tern, which was just a week ago, and now we're at 937 with the Crested honey buzzard. So that's quite an incredible list. And then we know you as a passionate bird and photographer. You're a great Instagrammer and Facebooker, and we know all your exploits through that. You've certainly guided me on many pelagic trips and seen tons of great birds. And what would we do without our bi-weekly rarity reports? And we get them on Mondays and Thursdays. And I'm always very upset when there's a rare bird around and you send us a message to say that you're too busy in the field to send us a report. So we do hang on every one of those reports of yours. So I was told a little story. So in December, the Madagascar cuckoo pitched up at Soekdoring Nature Reserve in Bloemfontein, near Bloemfontein, and a good friend of mine, and I'm going to not name him because I don't want to incriminate him, but he told me that people at the Soekdoring Nature Reserve, who'd all been to see the Madagascar cuckoo the day before Trevor arrived, decided to come back on the day Trevor was there, not to see the cuckoo for a second time, but to actually meet Trevor. So that's a testament to what kind of birding celebrity Trevor is, and how people love to get out there and meet him. And I think those of you who've met him in the field will know that there's plenty of knowledge out there to share. And I think we're going to hear a lot about his challenge, and I can confirm that he's a challenge birder extraordinaire. I was very, very far behind Trevor on the challenge list last year. About 40 species. We will definitely hear about how he managed to get so many more than me. And then maybe just to introduce the challenge and some interesting challenge facts. And I know these have all been verified absolutely accurately. So Trevor drove 14 million kilometers in his challenge year, and that's even in a lockdown year. If we take out 3 months of the year where he wasn't in his car, it's quite some mileage. He was away from his lovely wife, Margaret, for 345 days of the year. And I think he's still paying back a lot of those pink tickets that he was given for his time away. So I believe he visited every spur in the challenge circle during his challenge year. So you'll see I managed to get GPS points on all his spur visits. You see the red circle is more or less the challenge here, and all those little spur icons. Those are where he was refueling in between twitches. And if you notice this particular spur over here, that was outside the challenge area, and it was because he was in the challenge area and he was really hungry, so he moved outside just to catch up with his customary spur meal, which I'm led to believe is a cheddar melt burger with fries and a bar one milkshake. So that was what fueled Trevor in his challenge year. And then I've also got to just share with you that he not only traveled by car, he did some trips in boats. And so we had quite a few trips out on the Destiny. So those are our Cape Town pelagic trips. And I actually joined Trevor on one of those and was lucky enough to be on the Destiny. And that's a really comfortable boat. And then he also took a trip to Robben Island, which I'm sure he'll tell us about. And that was on the more sort of elaborate and zhuzh looking ferry that takes you to Robben Island. But he wasn't scared to downscale a little bit. And there was a report of an African finfoot in Robertson, which he may talk to us about as well. And it was quite interesting to see how low he was prepared to go. There he is, pulling the boat in just before setting off on a freezing cold winter day to look for the African finfoot. And on that particular occasion, we hear that they were unsuccessful. So lots of grumpy faces. Trevor's still smiling, but we coined that little boat the bathtub. And unfortunately, they missed it that day, but Trevor did eventually catch up with it. Okay, so the most important fact, though, is that Trevor achieved more than anyone else had achieved in the Wider Cape Town 150 Challenge. And we can't wait to hear about that. And just before I hand over, I just wanted to say happy birthday for Monday, Trevor. We even managed to get you a cake, so you can fetch it from my house tomorrow. Couldn't find a bird cake, so we got you a farmyard animal cake. So happy birthday for Monday. All right, Trevor, I don't know if your sound is on because it's now your turn to talk. I'm done with my intro. I just want to make sure that I can let you share. Are you able to share or not quite yet?
Not at the moment, Mike.
Okay, let me just sort that out. I know there's a button that I have to press. Okay, I'm going to stop my share, and that might help things. And then we just get Trevor to be able to share. All right, give it a bash now, Trevor, and then it's over to you.
Okay, is that working?
Yes, it's working well. We just need to see the presentation. You're just still in the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay, just hang on. Just trying to get this thing going. Why is it not doing that?
Very empathetic.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. That looks good.
Okay.
So whenever you're ready, off you go. I'm going to mute now.
Good, Matthew. That's
Sorry, Trevor, just before you start, I'm sorry. So
Yes.
If you have a question that you would like to ask during the presentation, pop it in the chat room and I'll interrupt Trevor and ask, but it would probably be better to save questions to the end. And then we'll give everyone an opportunity to pop questions in the chat room, and then I'll relay questions to Trevor and he can answer them in that way. Thanks very much. Off you go.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much for that elaborate introduction. A lot of it, of course, is totally untrue. And yeah, I have some idea where you got some of those facts from, and I'll have to chat to those mutual friends of ours afterwards to discuss it with them. But yeah, thanks, Cape Bird Club, for inviting me to come and talk to you. Obviously, you're all aware of the Cape Town Challenge, and it's effectively a big year. So what is a big year? I'm sure many of you would have seen this movie, The Big Year, which kind of popularized the whole concept, but it's been going for many, many more years than that. And it's effectively going for a calendar year, so from the 1st of January until the 31st of December, in a specified area, and trying to record as many bird species as possible. So certain people do it within a country, or within a sub-region like Southern Africa. Some people do it on a much smaller scale, like the 150K Cape Town Challenge. And obviously there are some crazy people that do it on a worldwide scale. And I was quite tired after just doing it within the Cape Town Challenge area at the end of the year. So I can imagine what those people feel like after racing around the world, seeing 6,800 species within a calendar year. But just to give you a little bit more detail about our local challenge. So it's based on a center point in the center of the field at the Cape Town Stadium. And then it's a 150-kilometer radius from there. So as you can see, about half of that is land and about half of that is sea, roughly, which means you have to obviously spend some time out at sea to try and get some birds as well. But on land, it does include some interesting areas. So taking a slightly closer look, up on the West Coast, we can obviously fit in the West Coast National Park and Velddrif and the whole of the Columbine Peninsula. And we can go up that little green patch just below the red circle, red radius, is Roshapan. So that's just inside the challenge area. And then moving a little more inland, we can get north of Piketberg, but not quite as far as Citrusdal. And we can include most of the Grootwindhoek wilderness area as well. Further inland, you'll all know the Tankwa Karoo. You would have been there many times, I'm sure. And the challenge area cuts through the very, very southern tip of the Tankwa Karoo. So you'll all know where the split is between the R335 or 355 and the Sutherland Road, the R356. And from that split, you've probably got about 4 or 5 kilometers along either fork of that road, which doesn't go very far into the Tankwa at all. It gets frustratingly close to Aerokop, probably about 1 kilometer or 1.5 kilometers south of Aerokop, which is a well-known site for things like Karoo Aeromomeler. So one really has to work the area extremely hard to get all the specials. Moving a little bit further south, you can get Robertson in, and a little bit east of Robertson, but obviously Ashton and Bonnievale are out. And then even further south, Raffiesonne-Ent is in. The radius cuts right through the town of Napier. So the western third of Napier is in the circle, but the rest of it is out. And then down in the south, Gansbaai and all those areas are in, and out down to Didam, which you can include. So that's basically the area that you can cover for the challenge. So to give you some facts, the total species recorded within the challenge area is 519 species. And of course, that is out of date. In fact, by 2 species now, because we've had the crested honey buzzard being added, and very, very recently, we've got yellow-crowned bishop in Noordhoek as well. So we're now on 521 species recorded within 150 kilometers of the Cape Town Stadium. So that's pretty impressive. And also just to know that the previous record for the Cape Town Challenge was 343 species, which was set by Vince Ward. So I called this talk an accidental big year because I didn't start last year thinking that I was going to take part in this challenge. I started the year, in fact, on the 1st of January with a very casual visit to Intaka Island, where I was just enjoying some of the local species. Just one other point that I can make here quickly is that I've decided to use, obviously these are all my own photographs, but they were all photographs that I took during 2020 within the challenge year. So some of them are not the greatest quality, but I just thought it would add something more to the talk if I used actual photos of the birds that I saw during the challenge year and in the challenge area. But at Intaka, obviously, I was enjoying the common things like pied kingfishers, and malachite kingfishers, which one goes there for great photographic opportunities on. And there was a lovely and very friendly male greater painted snipe there. So that was a really nice start to my first morning of the year. Once I left there, on my way home, I popped in at the Dolphin Beach Pans just to have a look at what was around, and was quite surprised to see this African palm swift flying around overhead in a group of other aerial feeders. So that was another nice bird on the 1st of January. And then went home and had relaxed a bit and had some lunch and what have you, and then decided to go out in the afternoon towards Mariesburg, where there had been reports of African quail finches coming in to drink at a little pan. And we got quite lucky and had these birds very, very close to us for a change while we sat in the car, using the car as a hide. So that was a nice experience to start off on the first day. The following day, I headed down to Strandfontein just because it's a really great birding destination, and I enjoyed a lot of the common species again, like little grebe and black-necked grebe, Cape teal and red-billed teal. And I was also lucky to bump into a couple of redneck phalaropes there. So that was a nice surprise at the sewage works. And from there, Margaret and I had planned a few days away at Platbos. This is a little indigenous forest area just inland of Gansbaai. I don't know how many of you have been there before, but it really is a great birding destination so close to Cape Town. It doesn't have all the species that one would get in the garden route forests, but it still has some really cool species for so close to Cape Town. We enjoyed things like African olive pigeons, blue-mantled crested flycatchers, red-chested cuckoo, which can be very tough to see at times, although you hear them calling often. And there were also black cuckoos there. Got some nice views of Knysna woodpecker, and it's one of the closest sites to Cape Town where you can reliably see the species. And then I was quite surprised to find a male black cuckoo shrike, which is probably a little bit out of range there. But as it turned out, became a regular thing throughout 2020 at Platbos, because a lot of other people went there to see it as well. Once we eventually came back home from there, I decided to take a drive up the west coast one day and headed into the farmlands on the Columbine Peninsula to go and enjoy some of the local species, chestnut-vented titbabblers, white-throated canary. This is a lovely juvenile Namakwa dove. And obviously one goes into those areas for things like sickle-winged chat. And I was quite happy to see these ant-eating chats as well, which were performing for me. And naturally, when you're up the west coast, you can't help but go and pop in at the Cathcop Visvanger Farm at Vulture on the southern bank of the Berg River. Such a wonderful destination. And I enjoyed the resident barn owls in the palm tree at the main house, and got to see some lovely chestnut-banded plovers. And while I was there, I got lucky and found a sand martin in amongst a group of brown-throated martins. So you can see the sand martin on the right of the photo, sort of center, in amongst all these brown-throated martins, the one with the brown band across its breast and the white throat. And I also managed to find the Wilson's phalarope that had been reported there a couple of days earlier. So that was a really special bird to see. In fact, only the second Wilson's phalarope that I've ever seen in Southern Africa. And I even got lucky enough to find it swimming next to a breeding plumage redneck phalarope that afternoon. So that was wonderful to see. And then suddenly it hit me. You know, I'd had sort of, I don't know, 10 or 12 days into the year, and I'd had some incredible birds. And I thought, well, maybe I should give this thing a go. I've already had a decent start to the year. Let's see how it goes. And I sat down and started planning how I was going to attack this Cape Town 150 Big Year Challenge. And the first thing I did was I drew up a spreadsheet, and I divided all 519 species into one of these 5 categories. So resident species, migrants, tough to get species, which would also be resident mostly, Pelagic Species, and Rarities. So obviously, Rarities I couldn't plan anything for. All I had to do was take on a mindset that whenever one turned up, I would do my utmost to try and chase it as quickly as possible to add it to the list. Pelagic Species, again, it's very difficult to plan sort of ad hoc. And really, I was just relying on trying to get out to sea as many times during the year as possible. The resident species were probably the group that I was least concerned about. And so I decided to start concentrating early on in the year on the migrants and the tough to get species. So that my plan was to aim at trying to get all the summer migrants by March, make sure that I had all of them under the belt and that I didn't have to waste time in the last 3 to 4 months of the year running around still trying to find any of the migrants. And the tough to get species, I would just also concentrate on those, work some of the spots where I knew some of them could occur, and also keep a close eye on email groups, social media, etc., so that I could pick up if people are posting sightings of these birds that I thought could be quite tough to get. So, as I say, I started off with the migrants, and amazingly, we've got 48 regular migrants coming into the challenge area. So that's a fair whack of species that you need to find and get under the belt. And I mean, these include common things like white-trumped swift, maybe not so common, but common swift, obviously the swallows as well, barn swallow and white-throated swallow. You've got to concentrate on some warblers like African reed warbler and willow warbler. Obviously, there's lots of waders to get under the belt. So this is a little stint. And then you've got to concentrate on some of the terns as well. This is a white-winged tern on the right and then a sandwich tern left of it. And there's even raptors like this lesser kestrel. So I made sure that I got out and targeted as many of these birds as possible in the first few months of the year to make sure I had them on the list and didn't have to worry about them later on. But our migrants are obviously not just summer migrants. We've got some winter migrants as well, like the Antarctic tern that comes down or comes up from the Antarctic, and you can get them on the west coast in the wintertime. And even Karoo thrush, which is a sort of late winter and spring visitor, particularly on the west coast. So those were birds that I had to keep in mind for later in the year as well. Obviously, the resident species, I didn't concentrate on too much because I thought that they would all be bycatch. And what I did was I, in fact, left a lot of them for later in the year, in wintertime particularly, because I thought that rather than waste important summer days going to look for resident things that I can get at any time of the year, I would use those summer days to target the migrants, target the tough to get species, and also chase any rarities that there might be. And in fact, some of our resident species are actually even easier in winter anyway. You know, in the fynbos and what have you, a lot of them are often more vocal and active in the wintertime. But you'd visit places on the peninsula, Kirstenbosch obviously, and you'd enjoy things like waxbills, forest canaries, lemon dove, which is surprisingly, Kirstenbosch is probably the most reliable place in the whole of the challenge area to get this species. It's incredibly tough to get anywhere else in the challenge area. Classes cuckoo. This is a juvenile Lanner falcon. And then you'd visit areas in the Hottentots Holland area. This is obviously royals, because there's a number of our special local species that you want to target there. Things like Victorian's warbler, Cape rock thrush, and sentinel rock thrush. Sentinel, again, another species that actually becomes easier in the wintertime to see in the royals area than in the summer. ground woodpeckers, and obviously the big special from Royale's Cape Rock Jumper, which is the bird of the year this year. Other things, other resident species to target are things like Cape Clapperlark and Agulhas longbilled lark. And there we have Protei Canary. This is one of the species in particular that's much easier to find in the wintertime, more vocal and easier to see, more active in the wintertime. So this was a bird that was up on Palm Mountain in the Wildflower Reserve. There were actually probably half a dozen of them up right at the top of the Wildflower Reserve, being very active and vocal when I went to go look for them. Naturally, one has to visit the Karoo areas several times as well to try and get a full suite of species. And some of the resident things there include rufous-eared warblers and Namakwa warbler. This is Karoo longbilled lark, probably easiest to find in the challenge area around Robertson. Black-headed canary. Again, it can be a tough bird. They're a little bit nomadic and very not easy to go to a spot and say for sure that you're going to see black-headed canary. Red-billed quelea is another bird that's increased quite substantially in recent years in the challenge area. I mean, they're now getting seen fairly regularly quite close to Cape Town. But again, a bird that's nice to get under the belt early on because they can be tricky at times. And then you have things like Karoo chat and mountain wheatear, Layard's titbabbler or Layard's warbler. And of course, one of the big birds to get in the Tankwa is the cinnamon-breasted warbler. We were very lucky. We actually got cinnamon-breasted warblers on our first visit to the Tankwa quite early in the year, or cinnamon-breasted warbler, should I say. But going back later in the year, this was probably around September, October, if I remember, September-ish. We had this pair of birds that were collecting nesting material. So they were actually quite friendly and we got very nice views of them, which is always a great bird to see because you can struggle a lot to get this in the Tankwa Karoo at times. But birds that I thought were potentially tough to get in the challenge area were the ones that I concentrated on earlier in the year. So these included things like the honey guides, greater honey guide and lesser honey guide, and even brown-backed honeybird. Sorry, it's not a great photo, but these birds can be rather tough to pin down. You can't just head off somewhere and say, okay, I'm going to go and see X honey guide or honeybird this morning. You can easily miss these birds. Others that I thought fell into this category were things like little bittern. This is a bird that I got at Dick Dent early one morning. Black stork. We had a lot of sightings last year of black stork, but they were a little erratic and difficult to pin down. So I was quite chuffed to get this young bird. Also double-banded courser. Not an easy bird to get in the challenge area and one that's also probably highly nomadic. We were quite fortunate that Garrett Skeed found a few of these birds near Mariesburg early on in the year, which we all managed to see. And they seemed to stay in the general area for a long period and were still there later in the year when we went back and managed to get slightly better photos of them. Secretary bird, another one that can be tough to pin down in the challenge area. Martial eagle. In fact, martial eagles probably become a little bit easier these days. You just drive up the R27 and you stop for your morning coffee at the Engine 1 stop by the Langebaan turnoff, and there's generally a martial eagle sitting around on one of the pylons there. Alternatively, there's another pair that live along the Darling Hills Road near Grotepost Winery at the moment, and they seem to be fairly reliable as well. Another bird which can prove tough is cinnamon-breasted bunting, but they've become a little easier in the Robertson region, so it was nice to head out that way and go and sort that bird out. And one that's really tough is red-billed firefinch. Surprisingly a resident in our area, but so tough to pin down. And we were lucky in the Robertson area to find a group of, I think it was 5 of these birds one day that we were out there. It was quite surprising because we'd gone for a long walk in an area where we were hoping to find them and hadn't found them, and our group was walking back to the cars a little bit depressed that we'd missed these birds when we happened to spot this group up in the tree. So it was a great relief eventually to get these birds. Others that are really tough in the challenge area, things like Karoo Koran. It's so frustrating that the radius cuts through Napier, because if you just go a little bit further to Bredasdorp and then out on the road to De Hoop Nature Reserve, this is a common species and you seldom miss it out that way. But it's a whole lot more difficult to find it within the challenge circle. So we spent a lot of time driving the farmlands just south of Rafis-on-Ent until we eventually found this pair of birds in a field one afternoon after we'd been out for probably 4 or 5 hours already driving around looking for them. Lark-like bunting is another eruptive species into the challenge area. It can be very tough to pin down, but got lucky early on in the year with this bird on the west coast. And then into the Karoo, where we had some real luck last year. This is a yellow-bellied Aeromomeler, which can be tough to find. I mean, they do occur in the Tankwa and where this was taken, and they're also around Robertson. You can get them at Pelagic Nature Reserve. But its cousin, Karoo Aeromomeler, was almost unknown from the challenge area. I mean, they're common at the base of Aerocorp, as I said earlier, which is probably 1.5 kilometers or maybe 2 kilometers outside the challenge area. But nobody that we knew had ever found them in the challenge area. And I think it was probably on our 3rd or 4th trip to the Tankwa where we eventually found a small party of these birds, literally within 50 meters of the edge of the radius. And we had to check and double check our coordinates to make sure that we were still inside, but it was great to be able to get these birds. Similarly, spike-keeled lark, another species that is really common as you go further north in the Tankwa Karoo, but almost unheard of within the challenge area. And surprisingly, not on the same day, but a subsequent trip, we found these spike-keeled larks in almost exactly the same place that we found the Karoo Aeromomelers. And another one that came from the Tankwa Karoo was rufous-cheeked nightjar. Again, a really tough bird to get inside the challenge area. This we owe to John Graham, who was out there and found these birds. And so we went out and effectively twitched them. And it was great to be able to, when they extended the curfew, I think at that stage the curfew was 11 o'clock or something like that. We went out to the Tankwa. I think it was still winter, and so it was getting dark fairly early. And by 7:30, these birds had started calling around us and coming out onto the road. So it was dark, and we could see them and photograph them. And we could leave the Tankwa at 8 o'clock at night and raced back to Cape Town to get home in time just before curfew. Another one that I thought could be potentially tough was African wood owl. I know there are resident pairs on the peninsula as well, but it's a bird that I wanted to get under the belt sooner rather than later. And then even some migrants, things like spotted flycatcher, which has become incredibly tough in recent years in the challenge area. In fact, this was the only one I saw all year, which was at Dick Dent Bird Sanctuary. And I didn't really even hear of any others inside the challenge area during the year. And another one that we were very excited about was this young Eurasian hobby that turned up at Hillbeck in the West Coast National Park and spent a few days in the gums around the restaurant there. Quite an exciting bird to get so close to Cape Town. In the good old days when I first started birding in the early 80s, I remember that they used to be regular in Stellenbosch, and that's where we used to go and see them. They used to come and roost in a certain part of Stellenbosch. But they haven't been seen with any sort of regularity around the greater Cape Town area for many years now. So really great to get this bird. And when you find some of these tough, almost unexpected birds, it can create quite a lot of excitement. This is myself and Michael Mason, and I think Garrett Ski took this photo just after we'd found the Karoo Aeromomelers. So we were like super excited about this. We're probably more excited than some of the other rarities that I saw during the year, because it was a bird that I really didn't expect that we were going to get for the challenge last year. As I mentioned earlier, one of the groups was Pelagic Species, and obviously they're quite important in getting a good total, particularly in our local challenge, because half of our challenge area is the sea. So I was fortunate to do a few trips last year, heading out into the waters southwest of Cape Point. And pelagic species can also be divided up into several groups. So you've got the regular species. This is a shy albatross, which one sees on most trips, and black-browed albatross. And this is an Indian yellow-nosed albatross. That's the smallest albatross in the world. So these are the kind of species you can expect at any time of the year. Then you've got things like this rather tatty-looking Wilson storm petrel. And you've got two species of giant petrel. This is a southern giant petrel with a greenish yellow tip to the bill. And skewers, this is a brown skewer or subantarctic skewer. It's the only one that's here all year round. And then you've got migrants. So you have birds that are here only in the summertime, like this bird, a European storm petrel. This is a parasitic jaeger, or what used to be called an Arctic skewer. Corrie's shearwater, also a summer migrant. Manx shearwater, again a summer migrant, although we do occasionally get records throughout the year. And Sabine's gull. This was a particularly nice individual to see, because we seldom see them with the full dark heads like this. Most of the time that we see Sabine's gulls here in Southern Africa, they've already lost the dark head, so they've just got sort of dark smudges behind the eye. So it's a really classy looking bird. Then you've got the winter migrants. These birds come up from the south into our waters during our winter. So this is a pintado or Cape petrel. And another one that you want to do in wintertime is the Antarctic prion. And then you've also got to time things to get out there when the passage migrants are coming through. So passage migrants are birds that are moving through in autumn and again in spring through our waters. And they're only here for short periods of time at those two times of the year. So this is a great shearwater, one of the passage migrants. Soft plumage petrels are pretty much passage migrants here. And one of the really special birds to get is black-bellied storm petrel. They do get seen in late April and May occasionally, but generally not regularly. So your best time to see them is the middle few weeks of October. You've got a 2 to 2.5 week window where you've got to make sure you see these birds. Then you're also hoping, obviously, that you're going to find some uncommon birds, scarcities, rarities, etc. So things like spectacled petrel, which has become, although it's become more regular in recent years, it's still a pretty good bird to get on a local pelagic trip and not guaranteed at all. Flesh-footed shearwater was another good one that we bumped into last year. This is still very much a regional rarity in the Cape. If you go and do a pelagic trip off Durban, you almost guaranteed have seen this species, but here in the Cape, they are very rare still. Some of the larger albatrosses, like this is a northern royal albatross, and this one is a southern royal albatross. In fact, this particular individual was the record-breaking individual. So this was my 344th species last year, this very bird. And then hoping for something even more special than those that I've already mentioned, you go to the real rarities like Southern Fulmar, which is not, it's not even an annual rarity year. I mean, we see them maybe every 2 to 3 years. And then gray-headed albatross. What a great bird to get last year. This is an incredibly rare bird. And I think if I've probably done around 500 pelagic trips out of Cape Town in my lifetime. And I've probably seen gray-headed albatross on maybe a dozen of those, if I'm lucky. It's a very rare bird locally. Another one that we were quite chuffed to get was red phalarope. We got these 2 friendly birds in March last year. So it was nice that by the end of the first summer season of the challenge, I had all 3 phalaropes under the belt, which was quite unexpected. Then one had to look at the regional rarities and national scarcities. And these are the things that you can't target. You know, you can't wake up in the morning and say, okay, today I'm going out to see X, Y, and Z. These are the things that you have to be spontaneous about. And if you're really wanting to build a big total, have to be prepared to drop everything that you're doing whenever news comes through. Some of the things are more regular than others, like African Chicana. This is a bird that was at Strandfontein last year. Squawko heron. This is actually a bit of an irritating one for me because it was a bird that I expected to have managed to get far earlier in the year, and I only ended up getting it right near the end of the year at Rondaflay. There was a bird that had been seen in Stanford in January, which we tried for and missed, and then it just disappeared. I mean, it must be one of the first years that we've had so few squawko herons turn up in the challenge area, and it was, we had to wait literally right till the end of the year before we eventually got this one that came to Rondaflay. Western yellow wagtail, a rather poor distant photo, but this was a bird at Strandfontein Sewage Works fairly early in the year that I chased after. Then, of course, greater sand plovers. These birds were at Kliphoek salt pans up at Vulture. They were quite friendly there, and in fact, there's been a greater sand plover there this season now as well. Possibly one of the worst photos I took last year, but that's a great egret over on the left. This was at De Plaat at Veldrift. This was also a bird that irritated me a little because I had to chase it several times before we eventually got it. In fact, the first attempt at this, we came out of the Tankwa Karoo. It was myself and Michael Mason, and it was probably lunchtime or so. We'd come out, and I'm sure you know the road. You drive along and you've got no cell phone reception at all, and then you come over a little hill and down into, you start going on a downhill, and suddenly you pick up cell phone reception. And there, amongst a number of other messages, I think it was in fact our host tonight, Mike Buckham, that was rubbing it in about this great egret that they'd seen up at Caithcorp Visvanger Farm. So Michael and I looked at each other and we did some quick calculations on Google Maps. And so we rerouted and we went straight from the Tankwa to Veldrift, and but managed to miss the bird. So I ended up having to go back, and I think it was my 3rd attempt going back. I eventually tracked this bird down. Another interesting one was this African red-eyed bulbul that was on a farm, in a garden on a farm near Gouda. It's miles out of range, but in fact there were 2 birds around, and they hung around for a long time. And it's not the first time that they've been seen at that farm. So they they may well even be resident in the area. Then there was an African pied wagtail that turned up at Gansbaai Sewage Works. One thing I must say that I learned from last year's challenge was a lot of different new sites, birding sites. To be honest, I'd never even heard of Gansbaai Sewage Works before last year. And so it took a lot of searching, and when the news came through, asking for pins, etc., about where exactly this was, and we eventually found it and raced off to go see this bird. And it hung around for about a week, I think. Quite a few people managed to go and see it. I was also quite lucky to find this lesser crested tern at Strandfontein Sewage Works. You can see it there in amongst the sandwich terns and gulls with its darker back and obviously the orange bill. And then we had this knob-billed duck that turned up at Strandfontein Sewage Works as well. Another really good bird to get locally. And right near the end of the year, Gabriel Jamie found this redback shrike at Intaka Island. This was also a bit of a painful thing because the news came through, I think, at about 6:30 in the evening that he'd just found this bird, and Intaka was closing at 7 o'clock. So I raced through to Intaka only to be met by a door being slammed in, or gate being slammed shut in front of me, and I couldn't get into Intaka. So I then drove around Century City and looked at some maps and tried to work out if I could view the area where the strike had been from outside Intaka, and I managed to find a spot and started scanning, and luckily found the bird and managed to get a few photos of it, and also got a few of my friends onto it who were also racing around trying to find a spot to try and view the bird. There were also fairly decent views of roseate tern at Danger Point last year. They were coming in quite close to the shore. It's quite unusual, and there's a theory that because of lockdown and no shark trips and what have you, and happening around Dyer Island, because there are some of these that breed on Dyer Island, that there wasn't enough food for them around the island, so they were coming closer to the land to look for food, and therefore giving people an opportunity to actually see them. So it worked out for the best for us. We also were quite happy with this young Balon's Crake that was fairly reliable at Strandfontein Sewage Works for a few days towards the end of last year on Pan P1 when it still had water. Then there was this green-backed heron that got found at Veltref. In fact, we had a great year for green-backed heron because there was one mulling around at Marina de Gama, and there was one at Fruilicate Nature Reserve as well. Probably the first time that we've ever had 3 of these birds in the challenge area at once. Some crazy raptor twitching as well. This was a bird that John Mathan found near Tesla's Dal, a Cape Vulture. Now, Cape Vulture, as you know, breeds at Potberg, and you can regularly see them in the farmlands from between Potberg and Bredasdorp, and even sometimes as far as Napier. But they seem to have this reluctance to cross the red line into the challenge area. So when this bird was found at Tesla's Dal, it meant we had to go straight away, which we did. And we were quite lucky to quite happy to find this bird. Equally so, this one. This was a white-backed vulture that turned up on the Darling Hills Road. So quite cool to actually get 2 vulture species inside the challenge area in 1 year. Some other good raptor twitches included a long-crested eagle in Stellenbosch. So this was also a very frustrating twitch for me. So what had happened, we had heard about a long-crested eagle seen over Stellenbosch on a Sunday. It was seen in the afternoon on a Sunday. So a group of us went out on Monday afternoon and got up onto a hill above Stellenbosch with scopes and spent about 3 or 4 hours scanning the skies above Stellenbosch in the hope that we might see this bird if it followed a similar route which of course it didn't. So we spent the whole afternoon just looking at empty skies and talking nonsense. On the Tuesday, the bird was then seen on a wine farm, not very far from where we had been standing. In fact, we could have seen the spot from where we'd been standing the evening before. And unfortunately, I was tied up at the time, but I didn't think it was going to hang around. News then came through later that afternoon. I think Vic Smith and Stan Novotny said that they had relocated the bird at the same spot. So that added a bit of a curveball for me, because suddenly now it looked like the bird was hanging around. So I jumped in the car and I started racing out towards Stellenbosch. And I knew some of my other friends were heading that way as well. And sort of halfway there, the news was that the bird had taken off. But I decided to keep on going. And as I was approaching Stellenbosch, a message came through that the bird had been relocated at another spot not too far away. And they dropped a pin on our Cape Rarities Telegram group. So I plugged the pin into Google Maps and I realized I was sort of less than 10 minutes away. Well, that's according to Google Maps. Well, that 10 minutes was the longest 10 minutes I've ever had in my life, because I found every single slowest driver in Stellenbosch that I could. They just would not get out of my way. And I was racing around them, trying to find back streets to get around people. And eventually I got there and managed to see the bird, and it actually hung around for a couple of hours after that. So all of my friends managed to get there in time as well. So all good, but a very frustrating drive to get there. Sorry for the terrible photo, but this is black-chested snake eagle. The only one I saw last year. This was up near Langebaan. And then another great find, I think it was Mel and Simon and Karen that found this bird, was a brown snake eagle near Veltref, which was also the only one I saw last year. Then we had some really special regional rarities turning up last year. This is an African cuckoo hawk, which was seen in Stellenbosch. What a crazy record. I mean, we've had historical records from Somerset West, but not probably for 15 or more years. And you need to go to the garden route really to have a decent chance of seeing this bird. So we got news of this bird that had gone to roost in Stellenbosch one evening, and we all headed out there before light the next morning and waited for it to get light, and we knew exactly where this bird was going to be, and there it was. And it hung around until the sun rose enough and warmed it up, and then it took off, and we watched it fly off over Stellenbosch, and it was never ever seen again. So if we hadn't made that move straight away, we would have lost this bird. It's never been reported again. Another crazy record was this adult black kite that I had, in fact, over my house during lockdown. I hadn't seen any yellow-billed kites for probably 4 weeks by the time I got this bird, and spotted it flying over, looked at it through the binoculars and thought, gee, that looks a little bit odd, and managed to grab some photos of the bird. And when I could zoom in on the photos, I could see the pale head and the sort of more prominent sixth primary finger, which separates it from yellow-billed kite. So an adult black kite, probably one of only a handful of records for the Western Cape. Equally as exciting was this immature Allen's gallinule that turned up at Macassar Sewage Works, another great bird. A woolly neck stork near Harrimon, and Crested barbet near Durbanville. But perhaps the craziest record was this long-toed lapwing that got found at Rickley Nature Reserve. I got a call from a birder who said to me, he thinks he's found a long-toed lapwing at Rickley. And I said, and I'm sure he could hear in my voice that I was a little bit skeptical. So, but he was slightly out of breath. So I asked him what was going on. He said, no, he's run back to his car to go fetch his camera. So I said, okay, fine, no problem. Well, go back, get some photos and WhatsApp them through to me, and then I can take a look. And to be honest, I was expecting a photo of perhaps a funny young blacksmith lapwing to come through. So when I got the WhatsApp and opened up the photograph and saw, goodness, this is a real long-toed lapwing, it was a crazy moment. Fortunately for me, I live probably 7 minutes away from Rickley, so I was there within 3 and managed to get to see the bird. And fortunately, it stayed around for a few days, so a lot of other people got to see it as well. Not just a great record for the Western Cape, but also a mega bird for South Africa as a country, in fact. And then just national scarcities, obviously European honey buzzard. There were quite a few of these around, but it's always nice to get it under the belt early on in the year. Then just quickly to go through some of the national rarities. We were lucky to get onto Malgas Island to go and see the Australasian gannet there. This was also at Macassar Sewage Works. You can sort of center towards the right, there's an elegant tern in this group of birds. Then there was the common redshank up at Cape Visvanger Farm on the Berg River at Veltruff. The American golden plover at, this one was at Olifantsbos, but there was another one at Platboom as well. Both found by Cliff Dorse on the same day, as well as an elegant tern. So the kind of way that my challenge birding would go is very well demonstrated by this particular bird and what happened afterwards. So Mags and I had driven up to the West Coast Park. In fact, we had just pulled into the parking area at Seerberg, and I was getting scopes and things out of the car. We were going to walk down to the hide when news came through of this American golden plover. So it didn't take too much discussion. Everything went back into the car. I got into the car and off we drove, and the person at the gate thought we were crazy because he'd literally just seen us go in a few minutes before that, and we were going back out. And then we raced down. I dropped Margaret at home because she said she's not going to start running around, and just as well I did that because it ended up being a long day. And then dropped Margaret at home and then went down to Cape Point. So I only got there probably, I don't know, 2 hours or 2.5 hours after the news had first come through. And it didn't take very long to find the bird, thankfully. And spent some time with it, photographing it, etc. And there were a number of other twitches that came through as well. Then we headed off to go and look for the elegant tern, which we couldn't find, unfortunately. And at about 4 o'clock, I think, I was just starting to head out of Cape Point on my way home when news came through from John Graham that he'd found a bared sandpiper at Strandfontein Sewage Works. So that, of course, changed my plans again, and off I went. Luckily managed to get that bird as well, and only got home at, I think, 7:30 or so that evening. So just as well I dropped my wife off earlier in the day, otherwise she would have had a very long day in the car with me. Another good bird was this broad-billed sandpiper, front left in the photo. Really poor photo, unfortunately, but taken at Geelbeck Heights, so it was a long way away. And then, of course, there was the very popular white-trumped sandpiper at Kliphoek Salt Pans at Veltruff on the right there. And there's the bared sandpiper that John found, sort of front left, the slightly larger, more browner bird in amongst the little stints. And then this was obviously a lovely surprise to add during the year as well, king penguin. And it was quite interesting to see how twitching changed during the year. So early on in the year, from January through to March, there were obviously lots of twitches and people were all very sociable and everything was all hunky-dory. This is at Kliphoek Salt Pans, I think looking for the white-trumped sandpiper. And this is at Cape Visvanger Farm, looking for common redshank. So you can see everybody's nice and relaxed, and just a few months later, this is what it looked like. Everybody standing 1.5 meters apart with masks on, it's just a totally different world. This was in fact for the African cuckoo hawk twitch. It didn't all go my way, obviously. I managed to miss quite a few birds during the year that did get seen. Things like on the top left, the white-fronted bee-eaters that were at Royals. Top right, not the greatest photo, but that's a purple gallinule, an American purple gallinule that got found in Simonstown, and in the worst possible time during the level 4 lockdown, where you could only go 5-kilometer radius from your house. So nobody could get there to go and look for it. And it had probably been 15 years or more since the last one had been seen. And then one of the more irritating birds for me was this Franklin's gull at the bottom, which was seen Vulture in the first few weeks of January. Maybe the third week of January. It was seen, I'd already decided I was doing the challenge at that stage, and it was seen while I was doing the challenge. So we raced up to try and get this bird, but couldn't find it. And then never sniffed another Franklin's gull the entire year. And come 2021, in the first 2 weeks of 2021, there's 2 different individuals at Strandfontein Sewage Works. How does that work? I also dared to step outside the challenge area 7 times during 2020. So I did a weekend to Plettenberg Bay in February to give a talk to BirdLife Plet. I left the challenge area on the 26th of December to go to the Kruger for a holiday. And I did 5 twitches. Obviously, I'm very much a twitcher. So if there's a new bird for me, whether it be for my Western Cape or Southern African list, I'm going to go as quickly as I can. Terrible photos, but these were white-throated bee-eaters in Port Alfred in the Eastern Cape early on in January. One of the reasons I left the challenge area. And not 2 weeks later, I had to go back to the Eastern Cape, to Cape St. Francis for this lesser noddy that turned up. Then things quietened down quite a bit, and it was only in September again, where I raced off to Mossel Bay to go and twitch. I cannot believe that I did this, but I twitched dark-capped bulbuls. It's an absolute mega bird for the Western Cape. So it was a new one for me for the Western Cape. But if somebody had told me that I would drive whatever it is, 800 or 900 or maybe even 1,000-kilometer round trip to go and twitch a dark-capped bulbul, I would have said they're crazy. Slightly later on in the year, we also headed to Sitwaran Nature Reserve for the Madagascan cuckoo. This wasn't even a new bird for me, but it was new for Margaret, so that was the main reason for going. Plus, I wanted to get photos. I'd never photographed the species before. And then right at the end of the year, while we were birding in the Gansbaai area, challenge birding, in fact, we got news about 2 buff-breasted sandpipers that had been found at Voelvlei near Mossel Bay. So we dropped everything and raced through from Gansbaai to Mossel Bay to go and see these birds, and then came back later that same afternoon. So just quickly looking at my most visited birding sites during 2020, obviously within the challenge area, I managed to do 16 pelagic trips. I went to Vulture a dozen times. I think probably 3 or 4 of those are because of the stupid great egret. I visited the Peninsula plantations and forests 11 times, the Stanford Gansbaai Elam region 11 times, Strandfontein 10 times, the Swartland farmlands 10 times, West Coast Park 8, Dolphin Beach Pans 7, Rietvlei 7, 6 visits to the Tankwa Karoo, 5 to Robertson, 4 to Darling Hills and Rafis on the End, and then 3 each to Macassar Sewage Works, Rondevlei, Royals and Stellenbosch. There are obviously a lot of other sites that I visited as well. But I mean, these were the most visited sites that I did. And just to give you an idea of my coverage during last year, all those little red tokens are birds that are recorded on the BirdLasser app. So you can see it was a fairly decent coverage. It's not that I didn't cover the areas that don't have any markers in them. It's just that I didn't find any new birds in those areas. So I think myself and several other challengers covered the challenge area fairly extensively last year. just a quick look at how things went. So I started off fairly well. By the end of January, I had 267 species, then added another 33 in February, and another 11 in March. And then, of course, lockdown happened. Level 5 in April. So I added 1 bird in April, which was the black kite. We dropped to level 4 in May, where we could get within 5 kilometers of our house. And I'm fortunate that I've got some wetland areas quite close to where I live. So I managed to find a couple of birds then. And then on the 1st of June, we went to level 3, and we were allowed, well, nobody actually knew what we were allowed to do. It was very gray. But I was like a kid in a candy store, as you can see. I just went out and raced all over the place birding on my own to get as many birds as I can. And then it really just slowed down. In July, I managed to break the record, which was 343. So my 344th species was that Southern Royal Albatross that I spoke about. And then it was just plotting on through August, September. October was a good month, obviously. I think we started having a few more rarities arriving, and then December and November. And just to put it in a graphic form, so you can see the effect that the lockdown had. I was almost flatlining there from the end of March, April, May, and then things started to improve. And obviously that sort of brownish orange line is the previous record. So I ended on 372 species for the year eventually. It's a lot higher than I was actually expecting to get. My initial target was obviously just to try and get to the record. Once I got there, I thought maybe 350 was possible. And then every time I reached it, I would increment my target up by another 5 species. And fortunately, things just kept popping up that I could chase. So if somebody had told me that I could get to over 370 at the beginning of last year, I wouldn't have thought it was possible. Lastly, just thank you to all my birding friends who played a massive and very enjoyable role in the journey. It wouldn't have been half as much fun without all of you guys around to go birding with during the course of last year. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Trevor. That was almost as painful to watch as it was to follow you last year while I lagged behind by many, many birds. But I'm really just joking. It was fantastic to relive so many of those memories that I kind of watched vicariously. So yeah, fantastic year, and congrats on the record. I don't think we're going to have to change that area just to make sure that we have a new record that we can chase for now, because I don't think anyone's going to ever beat that. So thanks very much for an amazing talk. I look forward to your next challenge. I'm not sure if Mags is going to let you out of the house anytime.
No, I'm sure she won't.
As I said earlier, I want to offer the Cape Bird Club members a chance to ask you a few questions. So Noel's kicked off the process. If you don't mind fielding a few. He's asking where in the circle did you get cinnamon-breasted warbler? I'm going to let you answer that because I battled to find it. I eventually did, but I think you had more success than we did.
Yeah. So if you know the Tankwa area quite well, as you're driving along and you get to that split where you go straight towards Galvinia and you turn right to Sutherland, we turn right there. And then the first sort of mountain on the right-hand side, you go through a dry stream first, and then you've got this sort of rocky ridge on the right-hand side, and there's some big pylons there. That's where I had cinnamon-breasted warbler both times last year. That's the only place I had it last year, in fact. I did try it a few other spots, but with no success.
Yeah, we found it ultimately at that same place, at the base of those pylons.
Yes.
I think it was about a week after you'd seen that pair that was carrying nesting material. But it can be a very, very tricky bird to find. And I think every time we went to the Tankwa, we would say, we're definitely not coming back to the Tankwa again. And then you guys would go and find either the Aeromomelers or the Spikers, or then John found that Rufus cheek nightjar, and that made sure we went there, I think 4 or 5 times ourselves, which was a record for us in in a
Yeah, I mean, normally I would visit I would go birding in the Tankwa maybe once every 2 to 3 years. So it was a very different situation for me to go so many times last year.
And then, I mean, maybe just a question from my side. You know, I am also married to a wonderful person, and I just want to know what kind of leash has been tightened this year after all the freedom you had last year. I don't know if Mags is online and she can maybe give us the answer to that.
No. My leash is not too tight, fortunately.
You don't have to answer. You don't have to answer the question. No, so Trevor, I don't know. So Mags has actually responded. She said that your leash is very short in the chat room. So I've got I don't know if anyone else has any more questions, but I think we've all we enjoyed watching your progress last year, and I know you shared a lot of your progress on Facebook last year, and we would wait anxiously to hear what new birds you were seeing. But it's also so nice to have been able to hear it all summed up in a wonderful presentation with great photographs. So thank you very much for joining us at the Cape Bird Club. I know I'll be seeing you out in the field very soon for the next great bird. But yeah, thanks once again for all the effort. Oh wait, Priscilla would like to say something, and she's our chairperson, and I'm definitely not going to say no to Priscilla. So let me just
okay.
Priscilla, you can unmute yourself if you want to jump in.
Hi, Trevor. I'm quite amused when Mike says he'll never say no to me. Thank you, Mike. Trevor, what a wonderful talk. It really has been fantastic. And thank you for sharing all those experiences with us. I love that you paused a little bit, just for a minuscule of a second, after bringing up the picture of each bird, because I found myself saying, that's a, and doing a bit of bird ID. But of course, there were lots that I wasn't able to identify. I think that a mark of your popularity is that we had 98 people watching on Zoom and another 15 on Facebook. I don't think that we've had such a good following for many, many months. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for inviting me to talk. And I think, I suppose probably the most important message out of all of this, and what I learned from the challenge last year, was that everybody always talks about going birding everywhere else in the country, but amazingly, we have an incredible diversity of birds right here on our doorstep in the Cape. That you can get, you know, that sort of total 372 species in a year within 150 kilometers of Cape Town, and that the total number of species is over 520. That's nothing to be sniffed at all. It's an incredible birding destination.
It is indeed. Thank you very much. And something that really struck me was that you have to be prepared to put in the hours and the miles. And then also, I don't know how aware you are that we're trying to get younger people involved in birding, and particularly looking at high school learners. And of course, nothing's happening in the schools at the moment because they're not allowed to do extramural activities. But may we call on you when we do get going, because I think that you would do an amazing job if we could organize just one outing with you with high school learners. Can we call on you for that?
Yes, no problem. I'm happy to help.
So, because I think that they just need to feed off enthusiasm like yours. So thank you very, very much.
No,
I
thank
will
you.
drop you an email tomorrow though.
Okay, great.
Thanks everybody. Thanks Trevor. Thanks Max for lending him to us for another evening. And everyone keep safe and keep well, and we'll see you out in the socially distant birding world. Good night.
Good night.